Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. We have a bit of a fun webinar today. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. And if you're joining us today, you're probably familiar with the Host Brokers founder, Hartland Ross, who is on the call here today. And if you know anything about Hartland, Hartland likes to be prepared. So when I sent him a calendar invite for a mystery webinar with no other information, I was not too surprised to get a Slack message 2 minutes later saying, "What's with the mystery webinar?" So Hartland is a little bit, he's kind of my guinea pig in this experiment today. He has no idea what we're talking about, but I wanted to invite Hartland on to get his earnest and immediate reaction to the topic of the webinar today. So Hartland, just to confirm, do you have any idea what we're talking about?
I mean, Devin, you're so connected to all things sports that the recent loss of Canada yesterday is one. There's thought in my mind, but beyond that, I can't really think of anything else that you're going to ask. So no, I have no
Okay.
idea. And this is legitimate. I literally have no idea.
Okay, well, thanks for playing along, Heartland. You're not in the right neighborhood. It has nothing to do with sports. So without further ado, let me share my screen here. Okay. So first question is, Heartland, do you know who Codie Sanchez is?
I do not.
Okay. Well, Codie Sanchez came onto my radar after talking to some business brokers in a peer group I'm on. And the gist is that she has a very successful YouTube channel all about buying small businesses. And she is largely responsible for how some of my peer group members have characterized being an influx of new buyers, novice buyers entering the space and making a lot of inquiries on M&A deals. And so what I've done today is I have highlighted a particular video that she's put out. It's a couple years old here, but I think it's characteristic of the sort of videos that she tends to put out. And you can see it cited there. It's how to buy a business with no money in 2024. And there's the link if you want to check it out. And I've clipped it. And we're going to run through this video. I have some particular clips from it in the context of MSPs. And I'm hoping that we can discuss whether you think that some of the feedback that she gives her audience about buying small businesses is appropriate for the MSP market in particular. How does that sound?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So let's find out. Is Codie Sanchez right about buying MSPs with $0 down? Let's check it out. Okay, so let's watch the first clip here about the promise of a boring business.
I tell you guys the hands down smartest way I've ever seen to get to 5 figures in monthly income. And it is the best way to hit your first $10,000 a month, especially in 2023, according to me. It has the lowest failure rate, it allows for income on day one, and it's how people like Warren Buffett made his millions. I know it's not the stock market. It is how the largest percentage of people on the Forbes 500 list made their money. And yet it is the only strategy that you and I can do that they also do. Believe me, they aren't doing Shopify stores or Amazon FBA or ad agencies. No, they're not. For you, it all starts with 2 words that I made sort of famous.
Boring businesses. Boring businesses.
Boring businesses. Boring businesses.
So Hartland, what are your initial thoughts on that video? And I'll just kick us off here by saying, uh, very nicely produced video, right? We could probably learn a little bit something from Codie here in terms of the quality of the editing and the audio and all that. But what are your initial impressions?
Well, you don't even probably know this, Devin, but I at one time took a lot of different courses, and some of those courses were on buying real estate and buying real estate with no money down, and so that the first thing is sort of like the idea of like real estate's boring. In fact, the argument is that, and even with businesses. You want a boring business. You don't want excitement in a business because excitement means problems. Now you could argue about advent of technology businesses that are doing crazy things and blowing up and going like crazy, and that's fun and not boring, and so that's good. But in general, boring is a good thing when it comes to business and real estate. And so, buying with real estate with no money down is a very old kind of concept, and it's ineffective in certain markets. So, honestly, I would apply that analogy to the businesses, which is the fact that, depending on the industry, the nature of the business, buying with no money down and buying, and typically they are going to be boring businesses, that in certain markets that's absolutely possible. And of course, as a buyer, that's hugely desirable, right? You can use somebody else's cash, whether it's the banks or ideally the sellers financing the deal themselves.
Yeah, but I think you're touching on a lot of the points that we'll probably hear Codie talk about here in the rest of the clips that we have. But I certainly agree. But then the question becomes, how do we look at this advice in the context of our world, which is really an MSP acquisition? So, oops. So, let's just contrast here a little bit in terms of boring does not always mean simple, right? And if we're talking about MSPs in particular, MSPs to some people are a boring business in terms of, it's just not, particularly, consumer facing. It's kind of behind the lines a little bit. I think that there used to be guidance for spies, who are traveling abroad, where if you're on a plane and someone asks you what you do, you say you're in IT because no one asks any follow-up questions. In that context, maybe it is a bit of a boring industry. But the reality is that it's not just like a type of industry where you can just buy it, you have the recurring revenue coming in, and nothing else needs to happen. There's a lot behind the scenes that it dictates how the revenue quality. So, specifics like how good are the customer contracts, how profitable is the business, how about the relationships with the clients and the employees, like all those kind of, behind the scenes factors play a massive role in the quality of the acquisition opportunity. So, the kind of the context of boring from where I sit hides some of the complexity when it comes to MSP transactions. Also just some of the hidden risks when you're thinking about boring business. Maybe you don't think of it being particularly risky, but certainly in the MSP space, there's risks in terms of the operation. So, some of the biggest ones are, what about cybersecurity risk for yourself and for your clients? What about the risk of clients churning if, service quality is bad? There's a risk of customer concentration. So again, all these things maybe not at the forefront of some acquirers' minds, but certainly make the boring title maybe not so applicable here. And then also the owner dependency in a lot of MSP businesses. They were started by one person, especially the older clients became accustomed to calling up that owner for IT support. Maybe they're still accustomed to calling them on their cell phone when they need a password reset or whatever. And the business really can't run without that owner being involved in the day-to-day. So, again, like this key man risk in the MSP industry in particular, it's kind of behind the lines a little bit, but again, it's not necessarily a simple transaction, even if on the surface the industry might seem boring to some.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe you're going to go here, Devin, but I think typically, like, I would relate the words boring to a main street business and some of the more traditional businesses that aren't reliant or connected to some of these elements that you've just described.
Yeah, I agree. Like the laundromats of the world, or things like that. No disrespect to laundromats. I mean, it's a good industry if you can make it work, but it's a little bit different than an MSP business for sure. MSPs are much more dynamic.
I had laundromats in my mind, gas stations, and it's the grass is always greener. So somebody in these industries might be able to share something relevant, or maybe someone listening might used to have had another business in a different industry, and they could argue some points, and I'd be happy to have a conversation about it because probably enlighten me. But even something like a bakery or something, right? Every day you get there at 5 o'clock in the morning, you mix your dough, you put it in the pans, you put it in the oven, it comes out, and you rinse and repeat. So these seem to be boring, pretty consistent businesses that aren't reliant on a lot other than your location and the relationships that you got with a local community.
Yep, I totally agreed. And just for some context here too, I have actually had a buyer reference that they're looking to acquire boring businesses recently, which is I think just going to support the idea that I think Codie Sanchez here is doing a really good job of getting her message up there. Okay, well with that in mind here, let's move on to the next clip. So it's from the same video a little bit later on. Yeah, let's check it out.
Here. There's 4 main ways to buy a business. First is cash. Second, bank or SBA loan. Third, finance through seller. That's called seller financing. And fourth, outside capital raise. So let's break them down. Cash. You use all your own money to buy a business. Pretty straightforward. You could do that if you're rich. Cons. You're out the money. You can't use it anywhere else. You have all the risk. Couple pros. Maybe you get a better deal, probably, just like with real estate. And you get it done fast. But this is my least favorite way to buy most businesses. Second is the SBA loan. This is the government giving you free money. The government will give you up to 90% of the purchase price of a business to buy it. Like, pause on that for a second. The government will pay you to buy a business. Yes, they will. The cons are it's debt, which means you're on the hook if the business fails.
Well, it's the US government, love.
More risk, interest rate involved, very structured, less flexibility, and getting a loan from a bank is like a colonoscopy. Can I say that on YouTube? It's annoying. But the pros are it's like free money, basically. A straightforward process. Lots of people help you in the SBA, in the actual government organization. Still my second least favorite way. I hate working with 90% of banks. I mean, don't you? Also, I find that sometimes you lose the deal because the SBA takes too long. Now, third way, outside capital. You go ask friends and rich people to give you some cash. The cons are it's hard to do at first. Most people don't know how to. And how rich are your friends? That's the constraints. Pros are less risk. You're not the only one on the hook as you are with debt. Faster to close. And potentially you get a better deal also because you're bringing cash to the table even though it's other people's cash. Now, this one's actually my second, third, I can't decide least favorite because I'm selfish with good deals. I hate giving away equity. That's a whole different subject we can get into. It's kind of technical. If you guys want to go deeper, hit me in the comments and say, I want to understand why equity is more expensive than debt. I'll tell you. Now, my favorite, 2 magical words. Seller financing. This is where the seller pays you through future profits of the business to buy his business. Like a loan, but the seller is the bank. This happens for 60% of all small businesses that are bought, meaning it's super common. Now, cons can take longer to do, to negotiate it. Some sellers won't do it for sure, and you have to know about it, but you're here, so you got that part. Now, the pros is you need way less cash. In fact, sometimes zero cash. There's less risk on you. The seller gets great tax benefits. You get a ridiculous deal and you make up any terms, unlike with a bank.
Okay, so there's the 4 ways from Codie that she likes to she runs through about how to acquire business with sellers financing being number 1. So same question to you, Harlan. What's your initial reaction to how she's laid out these options?
Well, I mean, Devin, as we both know, seller financing. The other one is the VTB, vendor take back. It's often a real estate term, but the concept of the seller essentially lending you money to buy their own business, and you pay them back over time, usually with the profits of the business. I mean, it definitely seems like a no-brainer. The reality is that all of these things make sense in a market there's not that competitive, and in the MSP space, IT services in general has been hyper competitive for a long time now, and so the idea that there would be seller financing of much significance in any deal is rare, right? There's usually got to be some kind of an issue with the business where the seller essentially can't do any better, and so they're sort of forced to acknowledge that if they want to sell their business, they're going to need to be flexible, and one way to do it is to provide seller financing. So it's part of most deals for sure. It's just not the 0 down or even like 10% down model that would work not only in some other industries but also in markets, right? I mean, let's face it, that the economy goes up and down, and what might have worked 10 years ago won't work now, and vice versa. So not to say that all these strategies I think are still will stand the test of time, but might not necessarily be appropriate in all moments in time.
Yeah, well said. And so I have a few prepared thoughts on this one as well. Oops. So the in terms of cash here, So the primary benefit to paying cash on a deal if you're a buyer here is it's cleanest, it's fastest, right? There's no debt service or outside approval process, so that is very appealing to a seller. So if you're a buyer and have the ability to offer cash, the likelihood of getting a deal done is going to be higher. You're going to be at a competitive advantage to another buyer who is perhaps using one of these other sources, especially if it's SBA or seller's financing. For the SBA side of things, the benefit, of course, is it preserves cash for the buyer. It can be a really good entry point for new entrepreneurs because the SBA, that's really kind of the purpose of the loans, is really to get people into the market and for small businesses. But it does require the business having really strong cash flow. So not every MSP is going to qualify. And the buyer's credit worthiness is something that gets taken into consideration here as well. So it's not going to be a good fit for everybody. But it's a very long process, as Codie said, as a colonoscopy. I mean, that's kind of extreme, but we've seen it. It takes a long time. Where maybe a traditional deal, or I should say, a cash deal, would take 60 to 90 days. SBA is more like 120 to 180 days. So most sellers are going to be, not as keen to go with an SBA buyer. But having said that, we do see a lot of SBA deals done. It's just all else being equal, the SBA buyer is going to be at a disadvantage.
Well, one thing I just want to comment on that Codie made, and she sort of corrected herself, I guess, but initially is a little misleading. Is she said the government gives you money. Yes, that's right. I'm repeating. The government is giving you money to buy a business. They're not giving you money. They are lending you money. And the difference is that giving means it's a grant. You never have to pay it back. Lending means you got to pay it back. And so she did qualify it in her graph by saying it's debt, but initially her comments were a little misleading in my view.
Yeah, and also it's not even directly through the government, right? So
Correct.
that's another,
True.
not perhaps a little bit minutia there, but it's through a government-approved lender essentially, and the government backs the loan. But um, and then so outside capital, obviously it will expand your buyer pool. You can get more deals done that way. If perhaps your partner has expertise in M&A and can bring in advisors and the some credibility and support to grow the businesses. So that's all great. Some sellers might be concerned, though, that if there's an outside capital involved, or outside investor, I should say, that there's also outside approvals. So maybe they're not dealing with the ultimate decision maker when they're talking to the buyer. We don't see as many deals done with this. This type of financing. Occasionally it comes up, but it's not the most common one. And then there's seller's financing, which is obviously the main topic here. So, one of the things that buyers really like about this is it does align the seller and the buyer in terms of having post-closing success. Seller's financing usually doesn't have any contingencies associated with it. So, it's supposed to be guaranteed money for the seller. But the kind of the implication is that if the seller doesn't assist post-closing and kind of live up to their end of the bargain, then the buyer can kind of hold this amount of money over their head and say, hey, like you got to come to the table and do what you said you were going to do, or maybe answer a call to help keep a client aboard, and whether it's 6 months or a year or 2 years down the line in order to get that payment coming through. So it kind of aligns both parties that way. It can also help bridge the gap in terms of valuations, where maybe the seller has higher expectations. Well, this can be a way to let the buyer offer a valuation at that level, the higher level, but kind of cash flow the acquisition by having the business generate them the cash flow over a certain period of time, and then pay the seller accordingly with how much the business is making. So as Hartland talked about, most of our deals that we do have sellers financing as a component, and most sellers are okay with a small component. But if there's a super high component, which is what we're going to be getting to in the next clips, then it's probably not going to fly. The typical MSP deal is, the majority is paid cash at close. The other thing to mention here too is there's one that is kind of missing, in my opinion, in this analysis, and that's the earnout. Earnouts are not so common in some other industries, but they're very common in MSP transactions, and it's similar to a seller's financing in terms of its future payment, but there's some sort of contingency tied to those future payments, usually around revenue being maintained. So just to note, those are super common as well. Okay, so let's check out the next clip here. And Codie's going to talk about zero cash deals.
If you're saying you're looking to grow your bank account and not deplete it by using cash up front. So I love doing zero cash deals all day long. In fact, in private equity, in my old world, we call this LBOs, leveraged buyouts. It's a fancy word for saying we have banks that pay for us to do deals. But then people say to me, okay, if it's so great for you, it's got to suck for the seller, right? Not the case. Extra profit from interest, meaning they get their purchase price, plus they get like a little check in the mail from you every month or quarter. It's just the interest costs. Faster than loan financing. Taxes from the sale are spread out because it's annuity. They don't get a lump sum. They agree to seller financing, which can mean the difference between actually even getting their business sold or not.
So what are your thoughts on the promise of a zero cash deal and the benefits for a seller?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes back to the market, right? And how active the market is, because from a seller's perspective, if there are various offers on the table, so to speak, for them to evaluate, all things being equal, why would you as a seller take the risk of seller financing if you didn't have to? Now, of course, the answer to that is, well, depends on the offer, right? So, how much more money would it take for me to offset the perceived risk around maybe I get paid, maybe I don't? There's a fairly, from at least the conversations that I've had, Devin, I don't know about what you've heard, but there's a strong belief on the part of sellers that whether it's an earnout or seller financing, that they're never going to see that money, right? Like, so they sort of view it as like, well, if I get that money, that's gravy. I just, if I know that I'm comfortable with the amount that's on close and I never got another penny, would I be happy? No, but would I be, extremely upset, and would this entirely change my whole kind of financial planning, personal modeling that I've done? No. So they sort of factor that in. Now, in our experience, seller financing payments, very rare that they don't get fully paid out. Earnouts, can vary. Um, we usually, if there's any kind of an issue around seller financing, it's usually as kind of a negotiated settlement on some aspect that has come up that maybe nobody kind of thought of, and both sides acknowledge that there's a sort of shared risk there, and there's some adjustments. That's typical if that even happens. But nonetheless, the reality is there's always a risk that it might not happen, and so why would a seller kind of take on that risk if they don't need to? And so I think the answer is that in some industries, some locations, that they do need to, right? And or that the offers that they're getting that are all cash or mostly cash are so much lower than the alternative options that it makes the vendor financing option more attractive. The other thing is that it really depends on who the buyer is, because if the buyer has got a proven track record, they've got a reputation to support other transactions where they've fulfilled their obligations, and they've got, clearly they've got the cash, then to either pay or other businesses, other assets, and especially if they're willing to provide a personal guarantee or some sort of the seller can put a lien against something, tangible assets, then all of these things can offset it. But it's hard with an MSP, which generally doesn't have any fixed assets, to address it through a lien, and a personal guarantee may or may not be something that the buyer is willing to implement and provide, particularly if the buyer is part of like a private equity group where it's not a personal guarantee on behalf of a buyer.
Yeah, some really good thoughts there. And when I think of zero cash deals, like there's one that comes to mind that we've done. And in that instance, it was a very small one-man shop that wasn't making any money, and the seller was offered an employment role, which was really the compensation, more so the compensation than the actual acquisition. It was their salary on a go-forward basis. So pretty rare in the MSP space, but I can appreciate that it might be more common in some other industries. So again, let's talk about it from the perspective of the MSP industry a little bit more here. Zero cash down means higher risk for sellers. At the end of the day, that's the big lesson here. And as you say, Heartland, like MSP sellers usually have choice. It's a competitive market. There's a lot of different buyers and offers to choose from. So you don't need to accept poor payment terms if you're a seller. You're going to have groups come into you most of the time who are going to offer you better payment terms. And then there's the old a bird in hand is worth two in the bush factor here. Again, most sellers want to get cash at close. They don't really put as much stock into those future payments, and as you say, they probably are skeptical they're going to get them at all. So they would rather take a lower valuation with more paid at close. Codie talked about the tax benefits. Those are those are compelling if you're a seller where you're going to retire, right? Because the year that you sell your business, you're probably going to get taxed at the highest tax bracket, and get hit with a pretty big bill from the government. If you can kick that down the line a little bit, where you're going to be getting that income, and when you have a lower tax bracket, sure, there's going to be a big benefit. But the problem is a lot of MSP sellers, if they're not looking to retire, they're looking to get into some sort of other industry or business, and presumably they're going to get revenue there too. So it's not going to be as big of a benefit to some buyers as it is for others. And then there's just a whole opportunity cost factor here too, where if the seller's financing is not if it's not as profitable as just investing the money you would have got at the beginning anyway into the market and some low risk investment, then it's really not a benefit to the seller whatsoever. So in general, it's higher risk, and that's why we don't see it so much in a competitive marketplace like the MSPs.
Yeah, let me just add one more thing you touched on. I think is really critical, and I'm sure this would it would 100% apply to other industries as well. But these days, a lot of the conversations that we're having are with those who are looking to retire. And so if someone's built a business their entire life and is now kind of checking out of that business, if you like, to sell it and use those funds, those proceeds to fund their retirement, they've worked their whole life for this, and to roll the dice on the basis that a buyer is going to hopefully pay them for their life's work is it's pretty daunting, right, for any seller to take that kind of a risk. If they don't get the payments and or don't get a significant amount of it, it could put their whole retirement plan and lifestyle and in real risk, real jeopardy. So I don't blame them, and that's a big part of these days of the deals that we're seeing just with the aging population. So similarly, this will be the case in other industries as well. But that's just sort of from our experience right now is what we're seeing.
Yeah, totally agree. And maybe in another industry, getting those, monthly payments for several years might be a good alternative in your retirement. But again, to your point, I think most would prefer the certainty when they're transitioning into that new stage of their life.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the fourth clip here. The example math of a deal that Codie is proposing.
So let's go through an actual deal in seller financing so I can show you how this works live, okay? Revenue, you can see here, $332,000. And we've got the profit of $112,000. We bought this business for 2x the purchase price, which means $224,000 as the cost. Now in this one, they originally wanted a 10% down or $22,000 down to pay for the business. And the rest of it, they would finance. The seller would give us $204,000 to buy this business. That means under these terms, we would make a monthly profit of $9,333. And if you add the interest payment that we would have to make for the seller financing loan of $212 a month, we've been making about $9,121 a month profit in our pocket, or about $109,000 a year. Now, that cash on cash return number, and cash on cash return really just means with the money you put down, aka $22,000, how much money do you make on it? But in this instance, let's say we didn't have the $22,000 down, like the person who actually bought this business did not. Instead of taking the offer of $224,000, he said, what if I pay you $245,000? I increase the price of the business, but I want $0 down. You finance the whole business for me. I'll pay you a little bit of a premium for that, and I'm going to take the whole business. Beautiful way to negotiate seller financing where you put $0 down to acquire a business that's going to make you $100,000 a year.
So Hartland, you mentioned earlier the examples of buying with $0 down or 10% down, which is the exact situation that Codie is alluding to here. So good foreshadowing there. It was all planned, I'm sure.
I had no
So
idea.
so what are your thoughts on the structure, and do you think a structure like this might work for an MSP buyer?
So I think that a couple of things that strike me. One is that, and it doesn't surprise me. So earlier in this discussion, I used the word Main Street deals, and Main Street means different things to different people, but certainly even larger than the opportunity that she's running through here. But a $300,000 business is very much a Main Street business, and so although as a percentage, the 10%, down, whatnot, it's still 10, it's 10%, but these are a very small figures overall, right? And so the kind of significance of that money to a seller may not, it's not going to kind of, I can't imagine this is going to change anybody's life one way or the other. So if you're selling your business for 220, whatever it was, Devin, 224,000, it's not very likely that there are too many places that you can, unless you want to go move to Costa Rica or something, that's going to fund somebody's retirement for 20 years. So I guess the implications of not being paid on that deal are not the same as if you've been working in a business to build up a $3-5 million business, and now there's a lot more money kind of at stake here and more significance, and you probably got expenses that are in a bigger metropolitan city, and it's just not going to be sustainable. So I think there's that aspect, and so the idea of, okay, well, we'll just pay a little bit more to offset that risk. I mean, absolutely, like that's what you have to do. You have to pay more to have someone agree to this, but how much more? And that's just a function of really what their alternative offers are, and then also the relationship that buyer has with that seller. Is this a friend? Is this a friend of a friend? Is this someone that they've known in the community for years and now wants to buy their business? Or is this someone who they've just met on the internet? Because these are all going to have different implications.
So the math doesn't really math for MSPs here. So the valuation, she's talking about a 2 times earnings valuation here. On one hand, that is probably a reasonable for an MSP of this size. If you have an MSP with $300,000 approximately in revenue, maybe a 2 times valuation is what you could expect. So that part seems reasonable. The closing payment, 0 to 10%, as we talked about, is way too low. Only a struggling one-man shop that's perhaps not making any money would get that sort of payment terms. We much more often see deals where there's 60 to 80% paid at closing is much more common in MSP transactions. Also, just she's talking about profit, but what does profit mean? Does it include the owner's salary as an expense or not? I'm going to assume here it's not included, in which case this is an SDE calculation, whereas
Yeah.
MSPs are usually valued on a multiple of adjusted EBITDA, which is assuming that a new CEO is going to be hired and that salary needs to be on the books here. So, if this was an MSP at $112,000 in SDE, then we need to hire a CEO, let's say for $80,000 to $100,000. Well, now your profit is 32 to or $12,000 to $32,000, and suddenly the business is worth a lot less. That 2 times multiplier isn't looking too good there. And also just the for MSPs, the revenue is not the only thing that matters when it comes to the valuation. It's how much of the revenue is monthly recurring, how much comes from projects, how much comes from hardware, how much from time and material, block hours, etc. All of those are valued at different multiples. And revenue that's coming from sticky clients who are on long-term contracts usually is going to give you better payment terms as well. So not all MSP revenue is equal, and you can't just look at the profit and project it out. There's a little bit more nuance to it there as well.
And I think the other thing here that's relevant, certainly if you're listening to this and you're a prospective seller now or in the future, that you appreciate the fact that the reason that someone would likely offer this to you, above the fact that, or beyond the fact that, it's a great deal as a buyer to do a 0% down deal, but to the extent that any buyer offers, much less than sort of 60, 80% down, it's because there's inherent risk in the deal. And so how can you de-risk the deal? Well, I mean, Devin and I can talk to you about a whole series of things that you can do. But the idea here, referencing the contracts that's on this slide, these things mitigate the risk of the buyer. And so to the extent that there's less risk for the buyer is probably also going to be more comfortable putting that cash down, assuming that they have the option through one of these other channels that's been talked about. Again, like any buyer would prefer a 0% down deal, but at the same time, they're doing it to get a good deal, and they're often doing it certainly in the MSP space. If there's any vendor financing being asked and an earnout, is because there's risk. So if you can eliminate or reduce that risk, you're likely not going to even have these conversations as a prospective seller. And if you're a buyer, it might sound like we're supporting sellers. It's just all we're doing is talking about the reality of the market right now. So I can appreciate it as a buyer that this may be compelling, but it's just you're just not going to be successful in this market.
Yeah, and so if you're a seller and you are thinking about an exit in the future, there are some concrete things you can do, right? If you have clients that are on T&M, get them onto recurring contracts. Maybe you have to fire a couple clients and improve that revenue mix. That's going to help your valuation, even if there's a little bit of short-term pain. Get clients in long-term contracts, ideally 3-year contracts that are auto-renewing with some sort of an opt-out clause where there's some teeth to it. Improve that revenue mix, which is going to decrease the risk for a potential buyer, and especially for that buyer's lender. If they are lending through a bank, the bank wants to see that proof of future income, the reliability of that income. That's going to help them get behind the deal. So if you're a seller, there's some concrete things you can do to get prepared and to address this concern.
Yeah, agreed very much.
Okay, so listen, that was the last clip for today. So really the big lesson here for MSP buyers is don't expect to put down $0. It's not gonna happen. Buying an MSP can be a great opportunity, especially considering growth organically in the MSP world is difficult. So it can be a great opportunity, or maybe you just want a good way to get into the industry. But it is not a passive, simple, automatically low risk, sort of boring business. And you certainly won't buy one for 0% down unless it's a really struggling business.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to consider here is that typically if the buyer, sorry, excuse me, if the seller has to sell the business for one reason or another, that's a motivated seller. And much like real estate example that I was referencing earlier, motivated sellers are kind of the best thing that a buyer wants, right? Is to get a good deal. And on the assumption that you have a motivated seller in an active market, then they're still going to get kind of close to market rate. So it's not going to kind of move the needle that much. But if you've got a motivated seller and you've got a slow market, or you've got a business that's just not very desirable, look, these things could happen, can kind of go your way. Sometimes the reason that the buyers are not interested in the opportunity is there are enough issues with the business that everybody else has kind of walked away. And so, you get a great deal, but you're getting a great deal on a business that everybody else doesn't want. And so, you got to recognize that. So if this is a fixer upper, if it's the house that, everything's falling apart on, and you have the knowledge, the resources, the energy to do a renovation, to use a house analogy, then hey, go ahead. But if fundamentally you are in the business of producing widgets that nobody wants anymore, services that nobody wants, then it's you get a great deal on a business that's really also not worth anything, because you're in turn going to be stuck with the same problem down the road. If on the other hand you've got a seller who isn't particularly motivated, and then they got a problem business. So these are the types of offers they're getting. Of course, their alternative option is to say, well, forget about it. I'm just going to keep the business because instead of you paying me that money, I'll just keep it myself, and I'll make the same money or more, a bit more. And I'll still have the business. A year or two later, I will have collected that same money, and I'll still own the business to sell down the road. Again, that argument only works if you want to stick around, and there isn't some other external issue that's forcing a sale.
Yeah, yeah, couldn't agree more. So listen, if you made it this far in the video, thanks so much for watching. I must say, and also thank you, Hartland, for playing along. That was great to kind of do this rapid react format with you. I must say, when I first learned of Codie Sanchez, I was a little bit skeptical when I heard of this kind of YouTube influencer with a big following who's bringing unqualified buyers into our ecosystem. But I did watch some of her videos, and I must say, like the content's pretty good. Like, there's a reason why she's popular. So I hope this video doesn't come across as anti Codie Sanchez. Like, it's just a lot of the advice is not applicable for the MSP marketplace in particular. But if you're interested in M&A more broadly, or just want to kind of understand some of the terminology and some how the industry more broadly works, definitely check out her content. As I say, she does a great job of putting together these videos. They're entertaining and well edited, etc. Hartland, do you have any thoughts on what you saw today with Codie?
Well, I think I would just reiterate that, especially if Codie ends up listening to this, that we're only looking at this through the lens of IT service firms and MSPs. So that's what we can speak to. I'm sure she's much more knowledgeable than certainly I am in many other industries, and no question about it. The approach is one that does have legs, but it's just not necessarily going to work currently in this market. Now, maybe it will at some stage, but right now, it's I would just say it's not going to be a competitive approach if it's done on the zero down idea. Again, as Devin said, vendor financing, seller financing is a part of almost every deal that we do, but not at a 10% level.
Exactly. So if you're a buyer who's putting down 0% or tells me that you're looking for a boring business, I apologize in advance for having sent you this link, but I'm glad we were able to get together and record this today. If you are interested in reaching out to learn more about acquiring MSPs or preparing your MSP for sale at a future date, feel free to reach out. Our website and email address is on the screen there. We do offer a free evaluation where we go through not only the financial aspects of what you could expect if you were to sell your business, but also some of the more personal aspects, and give you a rundown of the whole market as well. So please feel free to reach out. We are experts in the MSP acquisition space, and we'd be happy to talk to you. And thanks again, Hartland, for joining, and thanks to all listeners as well.
Thanks, Devin, for organizing it. Appreciate it. And reach out if you have any questions. Happy to chat. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.